We're on chapter 9. If you're looking in the Tanya book, it's on page 36. And I'll pop it onto the screen shortly. Let's just review quickly what the objective of this chapter is and what we've learned so far. This is the chapter that helps us to get a sense and an appreciation, understanding of the internal struggle that we all have. This is the twins of Rivka that are wrestling with each other. The one is drawn and attracted to positive things. The other one is drawn and attracted to negative things. And that's exactly what goes on inside of our own selves. The two souls, the nefesh elikis and the nefesh bahamis, the godly soul and the animal soul. So before we actually get into the text this evening, I just want to throw out a thought that's going to be relevant to the text that we're learning. By calling the one side of our persona nefesh bahamis, the animal soul, we're naturally implying that the other side of our persona, the nefesh elikis, is the human. That's the implied contrast. And when I say human and animal, I'm not saying that there's a part of us that is literally an animal, and then the other part of us that's the truth of who we are, although that is true, but it's more nuanced than that. It's a little bit more subtle than that. So let's try and understand this. We're told there's an expression that goes, Es ha'olam nosan belibam. It's an expression, it's actually an expression that is used in various ways in different sources. But effectively what the principle is that Hashem has designed the human being in such a way and the world in such a way that we each reflect each other. So what that means is, the expression even in English that we use is we speak about a microcosm and a macrocosm, which is effectively to say a miniature version of the cosmos and the full-scale version of the cosmos. That's how Hashem designed the world. So whatever exists in the broader universe is reflected in some way in the human being and vice versa. If we have insight into ourselves and how we work and how we operate, what our different facets and components are, we will naturally have a very meaningful insight into the world and how the world works. And that includes both the physical universe and the spiritual multiverses. So one of the key factors, and I know that some of you did hear this from me already this week, one of the key factors of understanding this interplay between who we are and what the world is that we're told our world exists on a system of fours, on a quadratic system. So everything in our world operates in fours. And that goes from the most pragmatic physical things, like there are 4 seasons, all the way up to the most spiritual and sublime things, like the principle that there are 4 worlds. So that's something which is obviously quite significant. And as a result, we're going to look to identify something similar inside of ourselves. So one of the 4 faceted elements of our world is that you live here on planet Earth and you have a look around, you can identify what we call 4 types of life forms that exist in our world. And we call them doimeim, tzoimeach, chai, and medaber. Doimeim means inanimate. So that would refer to things that are technically not alive. Or another way of describing it would be the mineral world. Right? The mineral world. So soil. Soil is not alive. Yes, it generates life. Things need soil in order to live, but the soil itself is not alive. Stones are not alive. Right? That's why you could go hiking and you could find a boulder and you know that boulder has been in the same position for millennia. Because it's not alive. And if it's not alive, that means it doesn't have the ability to move. It doesn't have the ability to change, to grow, to produce new life. So that's the very least developed life form that exists, doimeim. Things that are silent. That's the direct translation of. They're silent. They don't make an impact on the world. They are what they are, and that's what they will be. If anything is ever going to change in the world of the doimeim, it will be the result of external influences. So what would move that boulder? An external influence. Something happens in the world. It could be a very strong wind. It could be an earth tremor. It could be human intervention, or whatever it is. Something else has to act on it in order for it to move, to shift. or to break. It can't get bigger. Now, the reality of the doimim world, and maybe this is one of the key elements of the doimim world, the fact that it's not alive feeds right into this element. So one of the key factors of the doimim world is that it is absolutely beholden to gravity. So that means that something that is doimim can't fight against gravity. It's going to be completely controlled by gravity. So the stone is going to be in its place because the gravity pulls it down in that particular location. And that's where it is. It's pulled downwards. Even water, which is possibly the most alive out of the doimim elements, and I know what you're going to say, well, what about fire? Fire belongs in a category of its own. So water always moves to the lowest point. It's also bound by the rules of gravity. Now, the focus of our discussion this evening is not on the world of doimim, so we'll have to leave the mystery of fire for another time and another place. The next level of advancement that exists in our world is what we call tzomeach. Now, the translation of the word tzomeach is to grow. And that defines the plant world, because in the plant kingdom, the distinction between the plant world and the inanimate world is growth. So you take a stone, let's say for argument's sake, and maybe that's why there was a time that pet rocks was all the rave, because they're such great pets. Take the pet rock, you put it down, and that's it. It stays where it is. You don't have to feed it. You don't have to worry about its emotional needs. There it is. A plant, so you take a stone and you plonk a stone down in your garden. Let's just say for argument's sake you wanted to have like a little pebble garden. So you put the stone down into your garden. That's where it is. What happens if you take a seed and put it into the same part of your garden? So there's some soil and you put the stone in the soil, nothing. You take a seed and you put the seed into the soil, tzomeach. It's going to change, fundamentally. It's going to absorb nutrients from the soil. It's going to be affected by the moisture that comes into the soil. Hopefully it rains. And that's going to cause it tzomeach. It's going to cause it to grow. Growth is a sign of life. Leave the human world out of this for a second, but certainly in the plant world, the moment it's no longer growing, it's dead. So what defines the plant world? Tzomeach, the ability to grow. So, for example, you might have a creeper, and when you first planted it, it was a sweet little thing. And then give it a few years, it could take over the whole wall against which it was planted. And if that wall happens to be your house, could, start overcoming the whole house. Because it's tzomeach, it grows. Not only does a plant grow in size, but a plant also grows its population. So boulders don't give birth to stones. Boulders might break and erode and become stones, but that's a degrading, that's an erosion. Plants are tzomeach. Not only do they grow, but they can make other things grow. So you can have seeds, and those seeds can give life, and then new plants can grow, and even at a distance. So you could take the seed of this plant, and you could put it in soil thousands of kilometers away, and it will grow. That's much more alive. But the limitation of the plant world is there's several limitations. The key limitation of the plant world is it can't move. So what we identified about the stone is, how do you know that a stone is dead? Because the stone, where you leave it, is where you'll find it. It doesn't have the ability to move. Neither does a plant. Yes, plants will move in a certain range. So this plant might open during the day and close at night, or it might turn to face the sun, or it might be a creeper that moves in a particular direction, or the branches of the tree move outwards as the tree grows. Yeah, that's all true. But no plant is capable of relocating. So wherever it is rooted, that's where it is. So in the same way as the inanimate is stuck, the plant is similarly stuck. Where it's rooted, that's where it is. It doesn't have the ability to remove its anchor and to go out and move and go places. Second of all, and some people may contest this, plants do not exhibit an advanced intelligence or a mature set of emotions. Yes, I know the people who talk to their plants, and when you talk to your plants, they grow well and all that kind of thing, which is true. So you're putting in some kind of an energy. But nobody's going to say that, a plant has to go for therapy. There's even scientific studies, like quite scary scientific studies, where they claim that when you rip a leaf off of a plant, that the plant emits something that would be the equivalent of a high-pitched scream, the frequency beyond what we can understand. But that's primal, I'm saying? It's not like some deep emotion. Oh, I'm the plant that was left in the shade, I'm scarred for life. So they don't have that emotional maturity, and they don't have an intellectual development. Animals do. So that's the next life form, and that's called chai. And that's where we're going to begin our journey over here this evening. Because in the human being, it's when you hit the chai level that the challenges begin. In other words, every one of us at a certain time, every single day, is technically as useful as a boulder. And that's when we're sleeping. We're technically doimim at that time of the day. What are we doing? Nothing. We're immobile. If we do move, it's because of external forces, so, some kind of involuntary jerking movements, or maybe something in a dream that agitates us, because we're not consciously choosing in our sleep to move in a particular way. We're not consciously choosing to keep breathing when we sleep. So we're kind of like doimim when we're sleeping. Unfortunately, in today's world, there are humans who are doimim even when they're not sleeping. Right? Right? There are a lot of doimim people. I had one on the highway today. The next thing, his car starts drifting into my lane. So I obviously caught his attention. But what was the story? He was checking his WhatsApps or whatever the case is. So, he was drifting. Yes, of course we have to, at times, be doimim. We have to have our times of stillness, because that's what doimim means, right? That it's still, it's silent. We have to rejuvenate, we have to recharge. In the same way as the seed has to go into the soil in order to grow, in order to generate new growth. Of course we have to. But instead we're going to say, this is the pinnacle of what the human is. The sleeper. The napper. Is that like the pinnacle of the human being? No. So then we have parts of our day where we're tzomeach. And that might well be a lot of our waking hours. Tzomeach, remember, a plant doesn't really think. The plant doesn't sit there each morning saying, I wonder what time sunrise is today, because I've got to be ready for this. Then start anticipating that when sunrise happens, then I'm going to start opening my flowers, to my petals in order to be able to get all that. Yeah. It doesn't have that cheshbon, it just happens. So that's how we are, automated a lot of the day. We're tzomeach, we're productive, we're doing things, we're going, we're growing, we're contributing, we're there, whatever, but it's like it's automated. You drive, you land up at a certain place, you don't know why you went there, you had to go somewhere else. Why? Because whatever, tzomeach. You're just plant-like, you're being productive. It's not like you're sitting around twiddling your thumbs or staring at a screen. But these are the things that don't require major investment or maturity on our part. And part of that, it's not really for now, but part of that is even a certain degree of our character development is in the tzomeach realm. Because the tzomeach is basically you have a small sapling that becomes a large tree. And that's a natural process for a human being. You have somebody who has immature feelings, and then they become mature feelings, or hopefully they do. Sometimes they just become more embedded feelings that are still as immature as they were. Okay, it's also a possibility. But where the real battleground and conflict and complexity of life happens, chai, in the animal kingdom. What happens to the animal kingdom? Yeah, of course, you get some plants that maybe cause a little bit of tzoros. I don't know, the other day I was walking somewhere in the garden out over here in the shul, and the next thing I have blackjack in my sock. So I'm like pulling out the blackjack, and one of the guys in the shul says, "Welcome to spring in Africa." Yeah, okay, so there are certain things that cause a little bit of poison ivy, you know what I mean? Venus flytraps, you know? But the drama of life does not happen in the botanical gardens. You're not going to find, what was his name? Attenborough, what's his name? From National Geographic. You're not going to, describing the growth of the grapevine. There's no drama in it. Well, David Attenborough, right? So, where is the staging ground of excitement and drama? You go to the Kruger Park. That's where you're going to see things happen. That's where you don't know what next to expect. Right? It's not like you go out in the morning and you start trimming your azaleas or something like that, and you know exactly what you're going to find. Yeah, here it's you don't know what's going to happen yet. There's the element of surprise. You watch animals and how they strategic. This one's stalking that one. This one has a means of protecting itself. This one is trying to scrape away the bark of the tree in order. It's fascinating. The chai element, the animal element, is a highly sophisticated element or spectrum of life. And that's how it is internally too. When we're going to talk over here about the nefesh habahamis, about the animal soul, we dare not make the mistake of thinking, well, the animal soul is some big, clumsy, dumb part of us that just wants to have a good time and doesn't appreciate value. Not at all. The nefesh habahamis is skilled, intelligent, emotionally attuned, and very strategic. So that's where you can have a tug of war. There can't be a battle between a human and an orange. There's no a tzomeach and it's not going to be a battle in that realm. But the human and the animal, have you ever tried to train a dog? Have you ever, the first time you ride a horse, yeah? You ever ride a horse? You get on a horse, what do they tell you? You have to show the horse who's in control. Because if you don't, that's it. The horse is going to throw you. So that's where you have this conflict. The nefesh habahamis versus the nefesh elokis, the animal versus the divine soul, is effectively the threshold of maturing ourselves from being a human who has only lived in 3 of the layers of where a human can live, versus the human who lives in the 4th ideal layer of where a human being is supposed to live. The internal Adam, the internal human. That's the objective, right? The objective is not just to live in a society where human beings take the world and turn it into its ultimate purpose, which is, by the way, why we celebrate Rosh Hashanah on the anniversary of the creation of people rather than the anniversary of the creation of the world. Because to have a world is a great thing, but to have a world that has purpose, that's the whole point. And until there are people, there's no purpose. Internally, it's the same thing. We can have all of these components. Something can be very qualified, very sophisticated. We can go on and become major inventors, or find cures for dread diseases, or change the world, be environmentalists, astronauts, whatever the case is. That's all nefesh habahamis. Nefesh elokis, to engage the godly soul, is to live with a concept of something that is exponentially higher than where my brain even takes me. So naturally there's going to be not just a conflict, which is what we're describing in this chapter, but a very sophisticated conflict and a very subtle at times conflict. So how do we know, this is what we started last week, how do we know which voice is talking in our heads? Because we know that we're going to have 2 voices speaking. We know that one voice is going to be the nefesh habahamis and the other voice is going to be the nefesh elokis, and they are going to have contradictory aspirations. How do I know which one is which? Because the voice of the nefesh habahamis, considering that it is a sophisticated creature, is not always going to sound like it's rotten. I don't know if you've ever spoken to people who've been the victims of crime, particularly the victims of a scam. But you know what everybody says? Particularly the victims of a scam artist. So he didn't look like a criminal. So then you ask yourself, well, what do criminals look like? So they come out in black and white striped suits. Then you know they're a criminal. So they always have to have a scar that goes over the part of their nose that was broken. And then you know that they're a criminal. So they always have like a bit of stubble. A tattoo, a tattoo of an anchor. I don't know what are the signs that, the caricatures of a criminal. If criminals looked like criminals, they would not be successful criminals. If the Nefesh HaBahamis always looks like an animal, it would never convince us that that's who we should be. I'm sure you've heard the story that there was a particular occasion where the Baal Shem Tov sat with a group of his students. I was on a Shabbos afternoon, and they were eating together. And needless to say, of course, the Baal Shem Tov would share very deep mystical insights, and they would sing stirring melodies, nigunim. And occasionally what the Baal Shem Tov would do is he'd get each student to put his hand on the shoulder of the student next to him and close their eyes, and they would sing a stirring nigun. And the next thing they saw insights and apparitions and visions of another layer of reality that we generally are unable to see. So in this particular case, the Baal Shem Tov got them all to sing, and the next thing everybody gasps because they see a vision that they're all sitting around the table, all the Hasidim, with their shtreimels, busy eating, and one place at the table is not a person, but there's an ox wearing a shtreimel. That's who was sitting there. And the purpose was to illustrate that it is possible, even on Shabbos, even wearing your shtreimel, to be so engaged in the animalistic experience that you don't see yourself there, you become an animal. And we don't see it, right? We need somebody to illustrate it to us. The Nefesh HaBahamis is not going to arrive at our doorstep and say, hey, would you like to get down on all fours? Okay, we've got to be careful what we say in today's world because some people may identify that way, right? So you've got to be careful. But the Nefesh HaBahamis is not going to knock on the door and say, let's be a behemoth. For those people who read the Hayoim Yoim, which is a book of journal entries from the Rebbe from 1943 with a thought for every day of the year, today's thought was one of those dynamite in small packages thoughts, where he says, Der was is niederik ungrob, the person who is lowly and crass, weiß nicht as is niederik ungrob, will never realize that they are lowly and crass. And there's a variety of reasons of why that might be. One of the reasons is because nobody walks in with a sign saying, this is grub. This is disgusting behavior. Come, let's do it. This is how to be an animal in 3 easy steps. So because the Nefesh HaBahamis is an advanced and sophisticated and mature creature, we need a way to determine what is the voice of Nefesh HaBahamis and what is the voice of Nefesh HaLikis. So one clue, and this goes directly to the point we learned last week and will feed into the point, please God, that we'll learn this week, is that we have an expression, Ruach HaBehema Hayoredes Hilamata. The spirit of an animal is to always descend downwards. Ruach HaAdam Ha'oila Hilamayla. And the spirit of a human is to always orient upwards. Okay, there are layers of how we could explain what this particular thought means. But in the context of what we're learning is, where are we being schlepped? Where we're being schlepped. There are quite a number of occasions where you would see the Rebbe respond to people who had queries about, how do I know if I'm being motivated by the right or the wrong motivations, because sometimes it's a little confusing. So you'd say always, look at the outcome. Is this a behavior that adds to your growth in Judaism? Then it must be from a good source. If in any way it obstructs any part of your growth in Judaism, it's obviously not from a right source. Because Ruach HaBehema Hayoredes Hilamata, the nature of the animalistic spirit is to schlep us down, Ruach HaAdam Ha'oila Hilamayla, whereas the spirit of the internal man, which is the Nefesh HaLikis, is to raise us higher. So what did we learn last week? We said that the Nefesh HaBahamis, the clear way to identify that something is stimulated by the Nefesh HaBahamis, by the animal soul, is it starts with the target, it starts with the arrow and then paints the target. It starts with the impulse and then follows with a very elaborate rationalization for the impulse. So, classic example, person treats somebody badly, shouts at a person, embarrasses them, or whatever the case is, lashes out at them, and then explains why that had to happen. Well, if you would know what they had done. Right? So we start off with the impulse, we start off with what we're going to see from here all the way through, that Tanya will refer to this as the heart, although later on in chapter 18 he'll start to speak about another dimension of the heart. But here we're going to talk about it as the heart. That means the impulsive side of us. And then the explanation, that is the clearest symptom of Nefesh HaBahamis, animal soul. So then the reverse must be true for the Nefesh HaLikis, for the godly soul. It does not start in the heart. In other words, it doesn't drag the person down to the world of emotion, because remember, Ruach HaBehema HaYored Asilamata, that the spirit of the animal is to pull downwards, and the heart is a less developed part of the human being than the mind. So if it's pulling us into the world of the heart, then it must be the animal that's driving. So now, today, we can start to look at the other side of the equation, which is, so if I'm rising to the world of the sophisticated mind, then there's a better chance that it's Nefesh HaLikis. So let's have a look at that inside. On page 36, from the beginning of the chapter, well, you can see straight after the beginning of the chapter, there's a little full stop, and that's where we are. It's at the word ach. Okay, so when we use the word ach, we're making a comparison, and we're obviously illustrating that this is something different to what we saw before. So the Nefesh HaBahamis, we said, is something that starts off first and foremost with what I feel, and then the justification why it's important to feel that way, versus the Nefesh HaLikis. It is important, I think, for us just to acknowledge that the world we currently experience is a world that starts with how I feel, where there's a society that wants to define realities based on feelings. So that tells you who's in the driver's seat in our world, right? I feel this way, therefore it must be true. Therefore you must support and acknowledge what I'm saying. Okay, so then you have a sense of exactly where we are in our world. Let's look at the Nefesh HaLikis, the godly soul. Where does the godly soul operate? Where does the godly soul live? That's where we're going to go now, and we're starting with that word ach. Okay, see it? So, page 36, at the full stop, and on the screen you can see it easily. It's the second line. Ach, mekoim mishkan nefesh HaLikis. But the place of the abode, in other words, the home, the stomping ground of the Nefesh HaLikis, of the godly soul, where are you most likely to find access to your Nefesh HaLikis, is where? That is in the brain, as we're going to see, right? It is in the brain system that lives inside the head. It's interesting that regularly when we refer to the brain in Hebrew, or it's at least in Torah literature, it's a plural word. The brains, moichin, because we understand that the brain is a sophisticated being, and it has many, many facets to it. And in fact, that's what distinguishes the brain from the heart. Because the heart, effective just from a purely anatomical and functional perspective, the heart is technically a piece of hardware. It's a pump. And God forbid if the pump's not working, you take it out and put in somebody else's second-hand pump. And you can keep the person going. And the truth is that it's even possible to put in the pump from another creature that's not human, right? Theoretically. And maybe even a completely synthetic one. Because that's what it is. It's just a pump. Take out somebody's heart and you switch it with somebody else's heart, and they're not going to become the other person. Right? They're not going to become the other person. This is a wonderful surprise. Shavua Tov. So we're talking about the heart versus the mind. I don't know if that was specifically what you chose to come for, but
you were speaking and I can.
So you've got the pump. How much does science know about the human heart? A lot. A lot about the human heart. Because ultimately it's a piece of machinery. That's fairly, I'm talking in an irreverent way over here, but it's fairly easy to work out. The brain, if you've ever had to deal with any type of neurological issue, any self-respecting neurologist will tell you we really don't know much about the brain. It is so complex. It is so mysterious. It is so unpredictable that with all the knowledge in the world that we have today about neuroscience, neuroscientists will want to tell you we don't really understand the brain. So where does the nefesh habahamis live? In the heart. The animal soul lives in the heart because it's an animal. It doesn't have a highly sophisticated aspiration in its life. It's got a basic aspiration. Live, succeed, evolve, conquer, be the top of your game. Like really simple kind of objectives. But where do you expect to find the nefesh elokis, the godly soul? You're going to find it in a far more complex and mysterious part of the human being. You're going to find it operating in the brain. That's not to say that the neshama lives inside the brain. And if theoretically one day science was able to do a brain transplant, then you would become somebody else, which is, of course, one of the great questions, ethical questions of the science fiction of brain transplants. But it means that the operational headquarters of the nefesh elokis, the godly soul, is going to be in the brain. What does that tell you? It tells you everything that you need to know about the two realities. Often you hear people say, you should lead with your heart. And it's a very, very tricky statement. You should lead with your heart. Because how do you know? How do you know that your heart has the sophistication to appreciate what's right and wrong? The heart is designed to appreciate what feels good or feels bad. That's the definition of the heart. And that's the nefesh habahamis. The nefesh habahamis is not looking, don't tell me 3 steps down the line. Tell me it's a good now. The nefesh habahamis will say, listen, take money and invest it in the markets. Work out the best investment. Why? Because it's 2 steps. I have money now, or I could have more money later. Okay, I could relate to that. But try and tell the nefesh habahamis, the animal soul, try to tell your heart that what you should do maybe has more than 2 steps. And maybe you have to have a whole series of layers of complexity before you make a decision. It's like, no, I just want to go with my heart. In other words, without realizing it, very often when we say go with our heart, we're actually saying path of least resistance. I want to go with the thing that is nearest to how I feel, and that's where I'm going to go. Nefesh habahamis loves that. The animal soul loves that. Just keep it simple. Keep it simple. Just tell me, get me excited. That's it. The nefesh elokis says you don't even begin to understand. You haven't even begin to look at the layers of existence. You don't appreciate what the world is. Like that's the nefesh elokis positioning statement. One second. You just want to ask a question and get an answer. The nefesh elokis, the godly soul says, before you can ask the question, before you can get an answer, do you even have context? It's probably one of the most valuable things that a human being could learn is to say, whoa, let's understand what lies beyond what the eye can see. One of the most fun things about not being an economist is to be able to make fun of economists. One of the best things about not being a meteorologist is you can make fun of the weatherman. Because they get up and speak with such certainty. Political analysts, the same, right? They speak with such certainty. These are the factors. History has shown that these factors lead to whatever. So, I understand or I appreciate or I value that this is how it's going to work out. And those are the guys who make the biggest mess ups. Right? Who caused the biggest issues? All the experts. I'm telling you, if you had to do an analysis, if you had to do an audit of the whole of history, I'm telling you most crises were created by experts. Why? Because the expertise, a lot of the time, obviously I'm generalizing, a lot of the time the expertise is Nefesh HaBahamis expertise. Feels right. Based on what we've seen. It feels, two-step process. Two-step verification, as they call it, right? The Nefesh Elokis lives in the brain. The Nefesh Elokis says, one second, hey, before you start asking the question about economic cycles, before you start asking the question about the climate, before you start asking the question about how a person is going to behave in a particular scenario, all your questions are essentially based on one principle. What? What's going to happen? What happened in the past? What led to that? Nefesh Elokis comes along and says, one second, let's ask a different question. Why? Why? Why is there an economy? Why is there a weather pattern? Why are there people? Why are we here? Like those kinds of questions. The questions that people don't have the patience for, because by the time I answer that question, 3 economic cycles have gone past. So that's where the Nefesh Elokis gravitates. Let's try to find out what's beyond the immediate, the apparent, the easy, the accessible, the comfortable. Let's find what exists at a level completely beyond where we are typically operating. So the place of accommodation, the place of the headquarters of the godly soul is in the various complexities of the brain. That's why it's in plural. Right? The various complexities of the brain. The ability to understand and then understand more deeply and question and understand more deeply and consistently contemplate and learn and explore. And then from that vantage point of seeking objective insight, of pursuing and exploring and questioning what is real or why it is this way, that's going to seep down into the rest of the human experience. What he calls over here the limbs of the body. It's going to seep down into the rest of who we are. Which is truth, because when a person has a fundamental shift in their perspective, it has to have a knock-on effect on how they feel, how they think, how they look at the world, how they hear what people are saying, how they sense the various sensory integrations of this world. When the brain shifts gear, the whole body moves. So from that space of this incredible delving, or as we're going to see later, contemplative mind, everything shifts. V'gam belev, including the heart. And then when a person is guided by their Nefesh Elokis, when a person is guided by a more, and the word over here is not intellectual, because this is not a question of how intelligent a person is or whether the person is intellectually inclined. This is a question of whether the person shoots the arrow and paints the target, or creates a target and then finds a way to learn how to get the arrow into the target. In other words, the difference between the person who first states their bias and then tries to justify it versus the person who seeks the truth and then tries to make it their own. It's a very different space. So that means the heart is going to be a different heart. What does it mean, a different heart? So he's going to use an anatomical, allegorical explanation. So we already touched on this previously. Last week when we learned about the animal soul, we said, where does the animal soul live? Primarily in the heart. Where in the heart? We said in the left side of the heart, which is the part of the heart that is filled with blood. In other words, bearing in mind, of course, that the pump system of the heart is to allow blood in, oxygenate the blood, and then pump it out into the world, into the body. So you need to have one chamber of the heart where the objective of that chamber is to collect blood. So that's what we're calling the one that is filled with blood. And another chamber of the heart where the purpose of that chamber of the heart is to expel blood, and we're calling that the part of the heart which is empty of blood, as we're going to see now. So the operating theater of the godly soul, when it's using the heart as a tool, because you have to have emotion and you have to have a sense of personal attachment, it's going to be the right hand side of the heart. She'ein boy dam, which is the part of the heart that is absent of blood. What does it mean absent? The whole heart is broken. What does it mean absent of blood? It means it's a part of the heart that is not about me. Because we already learned before, what is blood? Blood is the kind of the emotional turmoil associated with my own interests. That's why we speak about a person saying my blood boils, or saying, my blood went cold, or whatever, because effectively, when we talk about blood, we're effectively describing the very dramatic emotional responses that we have to things. This is a part of the heart that is free of blood, meaning to say, it's also a heart, it's also emotional, it's also personal, because emotion is always personal, but it's not self-oriented. It's not self-centered. K'moshe Kosov, like the verse says, Leiv Chacham liyaminoi. A wise person's heart is to the right. Now that's not a statement of anatomy. That's a statement of the inclination of where the heart of a wise person goes. So effectively what we're saying is like this. There are two ways that a person can experience their heart. They can experience their heart as an impetuous, impulsive, self-centered emotion ball. I'm upset because you did this. I need that because I want it, right? That's what we're calling over here the left heart. The heart that is filled with blood, that is filled with the sense of the passion and experience and enjoyment of this world. But a wise person sees their heart as a right-handed heart, meaning so they don't discount the value of the heart. They don't say, oh no, we've got to be impassive people because there are principles and you've got to keep to your principles and rather focus on the objective truth and don't get caught up in your... No, you've got to live. You've got to have a heart. You have to have a heart. But what kind of a heart? A heart that's pumping out, not a heart that's sucking in. A heart that's generating energy rather than a heart that is taking energy. And so that's a very, very important distinction between how the heart operates when it's in the purvey of the nefesh adikis versus the nefesh habams, the animal versus the godly soul, which please God will continue next week. And there's another very important part or phrase in this, which we're out of time to read now, but it's a very, very important part of just understanding even more clearly what the heart looks like when it's the heart of the nefesh adikis. But like I say, please God, we'll pick that up next week.
Rabbi.